Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Digital Marketing Stories. I'm so pleased today to have Kirk Williams as my guest. And people that have been involved in PPC marketing, he's also known as PPCKirk. Kirk, good to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's good to see you again. I think it's been a few years since we've seen each other in person, but it's good to see you online again.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. I know that you've continued to be doing lots of speaking and everything. You traveling a fair bit. Is that right? I mean, I think I saw you in, was it SMX somewhere? And so where have you been?
So I was doing a ton of speaking up until COVID hit. And it's funny because COVID actually hit around the same time. I had some other personal things going on too. And I was starting to get a little tired of traveling. So all of that hit at the same time. And then I didn't travel much for 4 or 5 years. And it's only in the last year that I really started picking it up again. And so, yeah, over the last month, I was in London, and then I had to actually come back because then I had my team here in Montana because it was just one of those timing things, like the team trip thing. So I headed back, jet lagged, led the team thing, and the onsite, and then headed back to Berlin, spoke there, and then flew to Bologna, spoke there, and then came back. Yep. So.
And did you do, because I mean, I like last week I was in Brighton at Brighton SEO, and I know a lot of my kind of peer group from the PPC world have gravitated towards Brighton SEO in San Diego, which did you attend that at all, or?
I didn't this year, and some of it was because it was in the middle of 2 international flights, like 2 Europe flights. People were like, "Why don't you just stay in Europe?" And I was like, "I got 6 kids in the business. I kind of had to get back, help the wife a little bit, head back." And so we decided that we weren't going to fly. I wasn't going to fly to San Diego in the middle of that too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I find sometimes that there are a lot of people I know who will go and speak anywhere about anything. And a bit like you, I used to travel a lot more kind of pre-COVID. I worked it out. I was probably on the road for probably 3 months of the year because most of my trips weren't local. I didn't speak in the UK. Typically it was like Australia or Dubai or the States. I used to go to Vegas. I mean, I'd always say to people when they say, "So have you been to Vegas before?" I'm like, I must have been to Vegas like 50 times. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that.
Like all the conferences are there.
Yeah, I mean, I used to do Affiliate Summit and PubCon and various other kind of trips here and there. And for me, again, people used to say, "So have you been to New York?" And I used to say, the thing I like most about New York is the taxi going back to the airport to leave. It's just not the place that really vibes with me. Where's been your sort of favorite place to go and speak, both in terms of the venue itself, the country, and also the content?
Gosh, that's a good question. I actually really thought that, so I'm a big London fan. And I know that makes, as the kids say these days, I know that makes me basic. Whenever I say I really like London, people are like, "Oh, there's so much more exotic places." I'm like, I know, but also, I don't know. There's just something about London. I always enjoy visiting there. I always enjoy walking around. So I really enjoyed SMX London. I will say that Berlin was SMX Advanced Europe. And some of that maybe that was just a different vibe. So it was in East Berlin. And I'm a huge World War II fan. Like I was a World War II fan in high school deal. Like it's not just an old age thing for me. And so to be in Berlin, and so that was actually cool because London, I was there like 2 weeks earlier, and I always try to do something real quick in the city I'm in. So I'm not just doing a conference. And this time I went to the Churchill War Rooms. So that was interesting.
Okay.
And so then in Berlin, I went to, I forget exactly what they call it, like the Topography de Terror or something like that. And it's basically where like all of the main Nazi buildings and stuff were. Like, first of all, it's amazing how they've both kind of like honored the horribleness of that without also like celebrating it. I was just super impressed by the exhibit they had there. It was just real factual in terms of here's all of the horrible stuff that happened. There was a lot of like school kids there, which is really cool learning. And it really struck me. I was like, I wonder if some of these school kids might have older relatives who were involved in stuff. It was just this like crazy experience. And I was just like, man, in 2 weeks, and I was just sitting there pondering as I was looking. I was there in Berlin. And I was like, in 2 weeks, I was in Churchill and Hitler's headquarters, basically. And that was so interesting, just because less than 100 years ago, that was almost the end of the world sort of deal. So anyways, so Berlin was
and you look at how easy it is to get from London to Berlin, like by plane and everything else, and how difficult it was to get from London to Berlin like back then.
Exactly. Yeah, just fascinating. I love history, and I'd never really processed even just like the East Berlin, West Berlin. Of course, I'm aware of the Berlin Wall, stuff like that. I didn't know I was going to be speaking in East Berlin, and that was almost this. It was so visible. The architecture was so visibly different between the two halves of the city too. That was fascinating. I didn't realize that until you're there. So in some ways, yeah. And then Italy to me is all about the people. I love Italian conferences whenever I've been, because it's just people who like get together and they just love to eat and chat, which I love to eat and chat. So that's what I like about Italy as well. But Berlin had me on the history, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think Gianpaolo that kind of puts on the show in Bologna. I mean, I met him, I guess probably, I want to say 2016, something like that. And we met in the Czech Republic. We were at this conference. He said to me, I run a conference in Italy. You should come along and speak. And ever since then, I've been like, yeah, I really should. So far, like he didn't invite me to speak, but he said, oh, I'll give you like a link to the video. And I think at the time that he gave it to me, I was actually traveling, so I wasn't able to watch. But again, anyone I know who's spoken at that show said it's a great show, organized. The content's really good. But again, as you say, the food and the networking is always like top notch, right? Which I think is, for me, it's always one of the reasons as to why would I want to do an in-person event versus a virtual one, right?
Yeah. Especially like the food in Bologna, hard to beat that. So actually, I got to, and real quickly, like when I was there, I actually took half a day and took a train to Venice and back. Like literally just took a train, walked around Venice, ate lunch, came back. That was just, again, just like super fun. Like Kirk's day out.
And it's really interesting. I mean, I know like all of my friends, the American friends I have in the industry, and I've got many of them, they travel a lot, right? They go to lots of different countries and so on. I thought it was really interesting, like when the NFL started to do games overseas, right? I think the first year that they decided to do a match or a game in the UK, I think it was the Miami Dolphins. And I think, bearing in mind that all of these guys that play for the Dolphins get paid a crap ton of money. And I think something like 75% of all the people in the team didn't have a passport, right? So all the places that they'd gone to the Caribbean. So they'd gone to the places where they didn't need a passport. They could use their driving license. That was it. And I thought, wow, with all that money, and they didn't go anywhere other than just the 50 states or some of the Caribbean islands. And I just was amazed at how little traveled they were. Whereas I think now, because of the NFL having such a great sort of exposure everywhere. I mean, they had a match in Ireland, I think, and they've got them in Germany. It's all over the place, which again, I think is a great way of taking your product, right? In this case, football, right, to kind of countries other than the kind of the country that
expand your TAM.
In. Absolutely. And I think at some point in time, I don't know whether it's going to be in my lifetime, but I'm sure at some point in time there will be a franchise in the UK, probably in London. There'll be an NFL team from here, and that will just, again, it broaden the horizons on that. Yeah,
interesting. That's so fascinating just to consider. And I mean, people do this in the World Cup and that too, but you know, the effect that jet lag and that must have on a team, I would imagine they're going to have to try to be in country for a few days to get acclimated before the game, you would expect. Otherwise, they'd be significantly disadvantaged, I would think.
Yeah.
Unless you play it as soon as you fly in.
The beauty of it is that both teams are impacted in the same way, right? So if two teams are coming over, then they're both impacted with jet lag and what have you.
I don't watch football, I confess. I like sports, but in kind of the, wow, that's cool and fun to see, not stay up with it. I have too many other things to do. And also other hobbies I enjoy better. But anyways, you're saying two US teams came over and played like an exhibition game? Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes more sense too, because I was like, I wonder who they played. Like
originally it was just an exhibition, but then it got to the point where they now actually have regular season matches in London, and then they've had them in Dublin.
Know that. And that's cool.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really cool. I also didn't know. I'm also learning so much here. Never even thought about the fact that players would need passports, but of course they would. I don't know. You just don't think about that. You're like, yeah, the team just goes somewhere, but no, they all need individual passports. Wonder if they have to go through like normal passport control, or if there's a special place for special people.
Well, I mean, usually, again, I don't know about you. I've been to the airports a few times where they have VIPs and they get walked through by somebody from the airline, right? There's usually a kind of concession stand for VIPs, so they don't have to stand near public members like us. They can kind of go through their own bit.
Clearly, I'm not aware of that. Clearly, I do not hang with that crowd.
No, nor do I. I think the funniest one I had, I was supposed to be taking a flight from London to LA, and I was traveling with a guy who, he phoned me up and he goes, Jim, I'm running late. You're going to have to try and delay the plane, right? And I'm like, what do you mean I'm going to have to delay the plane? I was already curbside, the other side had gone through customs, right? And I'm waiting to get on the plane. I'm in the lounge, I'm having breakfast. And he goes, I don't think I'm going to make the flight. I'm like, so what do you want me to do? Do you want me to lie down in front of the plane? I mean,
yeah. And anything involved, that just sounds illegal somehow. Like anything that would actually delay the plane probably will have you end up in jail.
So I had to come out of the kind of my end and go through basically passport control again. So I had to go through as though I'd just arrived, even though I hadn't gone anywhere. And I couldn't do that until such time. They had to take my bag off the plane. So I had to physically wait until that plane had left before my bag was brought to me and I could go through and start the process again. And in the process of waiting for my bag to arrive, one of the Beatles, Ringo Starr, was walking through with his wife, and they were walking through with I think somebody from Virgin or something like that. Not Richard Branson, but somebody kind of like who was part of the VIP team for Virgin. And again, I was like stunned at how accessible he was to the public, but also how short he was. He was tiny. I always thought that these Beatles would be 8 foot tall and huge, but he was really, really short.
Yeah. They're giants of the industry. It's just not in stature.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So Kirk, thanks for coming on to Digital Marketing Stories. We've talked an awful lot about stuff, but not really much about digital marketing. So tell us a little bit about how you got into the industry.
Yeah. If anyone's heard other times I've told this might be familiar, but basically I was in seminary getting my master's in theology, and I was working overnights at a big box store, kind of like Walmart. It's Target for those who are familiar. And I was dying slowly because I was working all night, trying to get 2 hours of sleep, taking master's levels classes, doing the master's level reading, writing and all that. And just trying to survive that. We didn't have any kids at the time, but was married to, and just trying to survive really. And I was like, I will take the next job that I get. Lo and behold, it was actually a content marketing job back before content marketing was even called content marketing. It was just a small little online e-commerce business. And they were literally like, hey, we'll pay you no money, money, but not much, to take this parts catalog. Like we're talking like restaurant equipment parts. So like air compressors and things like that. So take this catalog and go page by page and put this product online. So, this would have been probably 16 years ago or so. And that's one of the ways, like these products were not online anywhere else. And so that's what I did. I literally like had the physical parts catalog and I would just be like typing it in. And then shortly thereafter, they're like, hey, we want to try some additional marketing things. There's this thing called PPC, Google Ads. You want to take a shot at it? I was like, sure. I want to do something different. I'm bored. and honestly, and I'm sure other people are like this too. Like, it's just one of those things where from the beginning, I loved it. I don't know. There was just this draw to all of a sudden realizing, and that was especially back in the days where there wasn't as much competition. It was easier just to be like, hey, I'm going to try to target these 10 exact match keywords where there's 6 words in them. They're very long tail. You may only get four clicks per month on them, but you'll sell 2 products per it. So it was also very easy just to immediately do some experimenting, see some success, and just really, really respond to that. And then long story short, eventually was like, hey, I should get some clients on the side. Cause like I said, not really making any money. Eventually went out on my own and figured I'd just be, I had 0 business plans, figured I'd be a freelancer consultant. And over time, I've added a few employees on, still trying to figure out what my exact role is. Cause I still love to, I actually manage 3 accounts myself. So I'm still really trying to be in the weeds purposefully because that's where my content comes from really. But then also I like to do content, and then also I do some management. And so, yeah, I'm busy.
Again, I'm like yourself. I love physically managing campaigns and being hands-on rather than just sitting back and being a manager and everything else. For me, it's a lot more fun to do it. I still enjoy it. Again, I'm sure at some point in time, I'm sure, I don't know, maybe I won't, but at some point in time, there may come a point where I wake up one day and go, don't want to do this anymore. But I've been doing it 25 years and I've loved it. It's really interesting to see Google are now celebrating the 25 years of Google AdWords, or Google Ads as it's called now. That's happened quite recently. And I always remember when they first started up, I mean, we had already been doing PPC with other channels, and Google pleaded with us. I mean, I remember getting an invite to their sort of small 2-person serviced office here in the UK in London, and they were in the basement of one of these serviced office places. And they pleaded with me to spend some of my clients' money with them. And I'm like, why would I want to do that? And at the time we were getting a 15% agency discount for working with Yahoo. All right, and so if you could match that 15% discount, we'll divert some of our money to you. So they did. They gave us the agency discount, which was great. So we were getting 15% from Google, 15% from the clients. Every month we were billing reasonable amounts of money and growing the agency. And I think for me it was so new, so interesting, and just evolving like at such a rapid pace, right? There was no YouTube. We couldn't, if we wanted to do something, there was no YouTube where you can go and watch a video to say, this is how you do this is how you do that, right? And you had to figure some stuff out yourself. And quite often, if you figured it out, right, you could have such an advantage over some of your competitors, right? I remember when you had things like dynamic keyword insertion and stuff like that, and it's just like, all of a sudden people were going, that blows your mind. So before long, every advertiser knew about DKI, and they were like, all of a sudden, all of the ads were exactly the same because they were all using the keyword as the title in the ad. So we changed from using DKI to not using DKI in some cases. But for me, it's been like that evolution. There's always been this change. And one thing we can guarantee that's going to happen, change, is the only thing that we know is going to continue. And again, I don't know what your thoughts are. I'd love to know. But in the last couple of years, the change has been so rapid, so in some respects harmful for people that have been doing it for a long time. I guess if you were just coming in for like now into the industry, you'd think, yeah, this is all great. AI and everything else makes it super easy. But for people like you and me, it's, wow, this is really harmful to what we know to be the product that we've grown up with and we love. So what do you think?
I would agree with all that. I mean, and we can just meander in any direction you want to. It's funny, as you were talking, I was thinking, oh gosh, I even forgot about Yahoo. Like, I remember doing some Yahoo campaigns, and then Yahoo and Microsoft worked together, stuff like that. And then I was also thinking, gosh, we have been managing things a while. And it's interesting, like I look at other agency owners, I'm just like, you know, they have 250 person businesses or something. And it's one of those interesting things that I've come to learn and appreciate. And that's just that you have various skills, and part of being a business owner, right, is that you have the ability to have multiple skills and to do it well enough to sell that and that. But yeah, one of just some self-reflection, like one of the skills I think like I've only begun to attain recently is almost more on that process / hiring / management / how do you actually turn it from, hey, I know Google Ads and I like doing this for a brand. How do you actually expand that into a business, if you will? But anyways, no, to answer your question more on the technical PPC side, for sure. I mean, absolutely, it's changed more in one sense. Here's my thing. It's changed more. Management has changed more in the last 2 years. I still maintain that the core of Google is still relatively unchanged. And in some ways, this is where I think Google has shot themselves in the foot a little bit, because in my opinion, the core of Google, and we can discuss up until AI, because there are some differences. So what I mean by the core of Google, let's say on the capturing demand side, is it is ultimately like a semantic universe. Like it involves words, and words involve knowledge enough to communicate that word. So that's the capturing demand side, right? And because of that, there are certain level of intent tied to words that, in my opinion, will always be important. And one of, I think, the biggest mistakes Google has made over the last few years is by trying to move aggressively away from that, by smushing everything together, by making it about the person and the efficiency target. And one of the reasons I say that is because I just don't think they have quite the view of the person and demographics and stuff that actual audience channels like Meta has. I think that's one of the problems. But I think at the very least, just this idea of the semantics of communication and that there being some intent involved in words themselves is still like highly important. And I actually think it's pretty important for them not to move too far away from that. And that kind of changes. And I would argue it still doesn't change even in a world of AI. I just think it gets more complex. But as things move to more conversational, for sure it's more complex. But really at the end of the day, we're still like talking about what has been communicated in words and assigning a value to that. And I mean, that's as I look back at the industry, that's just one of the things that has always been Google's strength, that I think they moved away from it a little bit, and it'll be interesting to see what happens overall. And we can go in any direction you want. That's just kind of me like blabbing out loud about that. But anyways, yeah, that's kind of my thoughts.
I mean, Google have always been a business that has said, we know more about things than you do.
Right.
And,
oh yeah. Yeah.
And again, don't get me wrong. I mean, I think when you look at all of the data that they have access to that we don't, like one of the biggest arguments you'll always hear agency owners talking about is they'll be like, oh, I'm getting broad matched with this term and it's not really relevant and everything else. But we don't have the context of all that's taken place with that individual before they get to the point where they've served up you as an ad possibility and people have clicked through. So for me, it is one of those things. I kind of have to take it with a big, huge grain of salt to kind of make sure that I'm okay with certain elements of the way things are now, because it's completely alien to the way I've grown up with things. But it's a bit like if you drive a car. If you drive a car and it's stick shift versus driving one that's automatic, it's a fundamental difference in terms of the experience that you have, but both will get you to where you want to get to. And I'm always interested to talk to people. So carry on.
No, that's a really interesting analogy, because actually, like Google, I think Google would say that. So look at PMax, AI Max, stuff like that. I think they would say that analogy. They'd be like, yeah, you've been doing stick shift. We're saying, hey, here's the automatic. It's way easier to get in the car and drive. And the funny thing is that I increasingly argue it is absolutely not the case, because as things, I've noticed that more automation increases instability. That makes it more difficult for projections and for budgeting and for clients just to know what to expect with Google. I've actually had clients complain about this, not led by us, but just to us in terms of Google used to be like the stable channel, and it's just not anymore. And what they meant was we just knew what we were getting and how much, whether we were happy or not. It was just kind of like that's what we'd get from Google. And now it's chaotic. Some of that is just because of the idea of AI. And to me, this is where especially it's not great for small budgets and smaller advertisers, because it's like, in order for AI to learn well and to do its thing, like there just has to be such an amount of data, as we all know, that like there are times where it does really well. Like we definitely use PMax and AI Maxes. We've tested it and things like that. But I think this is my thing, especially with small budgets, is I genuinely think that there needs to be a better understanding of what are the needs and size of each account, and then how do you build an account for that? And on the smaller side, what that means is like Google coming in and saying, hey, we have all of this potential for you. It's yes, but a budget spending $2,000 a month is like never going to realize that potential. And so what we need, and this is where I go back to words, what we need is to say, hey, you're right. There's a whole lot of opportunity there. At some point, we're going to be able to invest in that. We can't right now. That means what we need to do is we need to invest in these 10 words that we know are exactly what our target audience and exactly their location. They're looking exactly for us. And part of probably my biggest complaint right now is it's just harder to do that with Google than it used to be as we get into the mush of close variants and even just like the changed match types and all that stuff. And so again, that's where I just think there's a both and the lack of data, and there is an argument for go ahead.
You think about it, like I'm paying you for keywords, right? And you're not even telling me what you've matched me with, right? So again, I mean, I think in some respects it's almost, I guess maybe they've all. So Facebook saw things that Google were doing and went, oh, we're going to do that, right? Google saw things that Microsoft were doing, oh, we're going to do that. And ultimately, I think what's probably happened is they've just ended up in this position where they can underperform with impunity and not be punished for it. I mean, if you think about it, if you're an agency, if you had a horrible performance, right, based upon, you said, hey, I want to generate leads at, or let's say in your case, you're primarily e-commerce. I want to generate sales and I can afford to spend $25 to acquire a sale, right? And Google come in and they deliver you sales that cost $150, right? And they're like, with impunity, they can just go, you just spent your money, right? And there's not much you can do short of switching everything off, right? You either have to say, just carry on playing the game and hope things improve, or like I said, you just have to go and say, it's our way or the highway. And in the case of with Google, there's not really that many alternatives. You can say, I'll go and do that instead. And I think Facebook have done it, Google have done it, Microsoft have done it to a point. And for me, it's disappointing. I mean, if we were an agency and we did poor performance, let's say we didn't deliver like for a couple of months, we'd probably be canned like that. And unfortunately, Google's in a position where they can, like I said, with impunity, just deliver poor results and not be punished for it. I don't know if punish is the right word, but there's no penalty for them doing that.
Yeah. Like you said, other than us just not spending. Yeah. I mean, to me, it's okay. I think Google should do two things: have your automated stuff for big budgets. I will say it again, like we absolutely have seen certain clients where there are certain audiences really successful. They have a good look at the market that matches with Google's ability to identify who that audience is, the product, all that stuff, right? There's just a good fit that they have with some of those automated tools. And I do think there's additional success that can be found more rapidly by Google's automation tools too. So I think there is a world with that. And then I think there's just a world.
Are those brands that have got like a significant amount of above the line activity going? So TV, radio, print, established brands that have been around a while, or is it kind of new startups?
I would say well established, but not like doing a bunch of OAH and all that, like you described, TV, all that. No, I mean, a lot of these are just like solid D2C brands. And again, like what I've noticed is sometimes it's almost like what aligns with Google has various audiences, I think, that are a little better defined, that for some reason they're able to better define. This is this exact. I'm trying not to say exactly. There's especially a client that I have very specifically in mind, where it's just for some reason Google's, hey, we have this exact audience for you and you can build it, and like we will crush it at it. And not all of our businesses are like that. And again, some of that is just like to Google's like defense. Then we'll have clients where it's we talk about TAM. The TAM is women 40 to 65. That's the TAM. That's a whole lot of people. Yeah. So that's why you're either, I'm trying to think of what some of the billions of dollar mega companies are, but you're either like L'Oreal because you're able to actually target your TAM, or it's actually really difficult because and you have to, and that's part of what we do as PPCers, right? We try to better define and filter into, okay, yes, this is everyone we could reach, but also how do we get better at really finding that out? And I think part of my thing that I've tried to beat the drum on this regularly, especially because we do have a bunch of small budgets that we work with as well, is I think what I remember people getting into Google and being excited about in the beginning was because you could find relatively specific phrases that were low cost in the auctions, that were good targets for you to bid on, that were reliable in converting. So you had a decent CVR. That is how smaller budgets were able to begin with Google, and then eventually grow to the point where they could risk more in waste, right? Because as you start to get way into more prospecting, there's greater risk. You're going to have greater waste. That's why you have a lower ROAS target often for prospecting. And all that to say is, I think a big thing that Google should be aggressively pursuing for their own long-term health is seeing how to allow for more specific targeting again. And I understand there's privacy issues. Hey, that's figured out.
But so more specific
targeting as well as lower CPCs.
Do you think they're going to go there?
Oh, no, absolutely not. Because the draw of, I think they are, I think it is impossible for them to get away from the shareholders' obsession. Like that's the game. So of
Yeah.
course, like the shareholders are obsessed with like ongoing growth, right? And so if you don't post that growth, even if you have a long-term plan, whatever, they're not going to be happy. So no, I don't think so. But I do think that if they do want to be able to continue to be able to be on the small budget side so that small budgets can get into bigger budgets, I just think like CPC costs overall have to go down. And that's not just an auction argument, because we've seen now proof from DOJ and that sort of thing that they are inflating bid floors on low competition auctions. And again, that's exactly what I'm saying is like, we used to find low competition auctions. I think what I'm trying to say is that's what started the game for us and a lot of clients in liking Google, and Google's shooting the very thing that like first got a lot of brands into Google. I just think that's foolish.
I mean, it's a bit like when they introduced Performance Max, they did it to the detriment of the advertisers who had spent, advertising agency who had spent a ton of time working out how to run a Google Display Network campaign or a YouTube campaign. They knew what the pain points were in setting those up, and some of the kind of the trigger points that could really kind of make things go badly wrong, but also kind of get you scale, right? And obviously when they introduced Performance Max, it was like a kind of a consolidation of all of the products that Google had. And I think a lot of people were trying YouTube campaigns, failing miserably, turning it off and saying, I'm not going to run YouTube, right? Trying GDN, failing miserably, turn it off. Try Gmail, failing miserably, turning it off, right? So Google could see that advertisers were just not spending money on some of these products that had clearly like a large footprint in terms of the amount of page views or impressions that they had. And I think that obviously they introduced Performance Max to enable you to take that and go elsewhere. One of the challenges was always like if you wanted to run YouTube campaigns, quite often the barrier to entry was that the advertisers didn't have creative, didn't have any videos. So again, Google came out with some tools that help people to create videos. And now with AI, there's a lot more. People can create variations of product images and things like that, which again, I think is some of those elements are quite cool, but they've made it, everything has to be, you have to adopt everything. And I'm like, I want to be a lot more selective.
You have to adopt everything. And by the way, it's going to take 6 to 20 months to train, in which you're paying us all that time. And of course, no one can guarantee success. And that's fair. That's part of marketing is risk. But again, that's the whole, like, how do you tell a business, hey, we're going to adopt every single thing they do, hope it works for months. And I think that's part of my thing. When like what used to be is you were able to say, hey, I'm not totally sure, but as we've done our research, and as we look at this is what people are communicating they're interested right now, that's what you're selling. I think there's a very high likelihood if we start getting in front of those people that they're going to buy from you. And there was. I mean, that's the thing, is that was proven over and over again. I don't know. One thing I'll say that I am encouraged by. So I was thinking, like, as you were talking about, PMax is interesting because for us, we remember when PMax first rolled out, and like part of my still frustration about PMax is not the PMax of right now. It's just what happened back then, which was basically what you said. It was kind of like, hey, here's this magic tool that's going to solve all your problems. And by the way, do it because we're the people saying take your medicine. We're the doctors saying take your medicine and do it, whether you like it or not. That's how it was treated. And thankfully, I'm really happy about this. Over time, Google has really switched on PMax. So maybe someone walking into PMax as a new advertiser today would be like, wow, there's a lot of visibility to data. Some of that's because of conversations like this. We fought like our butts off for that for search terms and stuff like that. So I'm really happy about that and some of those changes and that it does seem have taken place. So that's been encouraging. And I think there is more. I would love to see more of that. It'd be nice to not just have channel insight, but more specific channel control, for instance, AP Max, vice versa, and demand gen and all that. But there have been some changes in a healthy way with that too, that I think are good. Yeah,
it's always a thing. Like whenever they came out with a new thing, right, there would be a controlled audience of people that would have access to it, right? And for me, it was always going to be the real rubber hitting the road with PMax was when everyone had access to it, right? If you had a small white labeled group of people that had access to it, then those people are always going to have success because nobody else has access to it, right? So the competitive nature of the auctions are not built up in that ecosystem, right? Once everyone's got access to it, all of a sudden the floors and ceilings, right, reposition themselves, right, in every vertical, right, to the points where it's good for Google and it may be just about good enough for advertisers to go, I've got enough success to keep going and keep trying, right, rather than getting no success at all and going, I'm not going to do that anymore. I've always said it's a little bit like them giving you a little dime bag of cocaine or something, right? All of a sudden, it's just want to give you enough to keep you going, keep trying, right? Rather than solving things and as you say, putting in the right floor for what the auction should be at. I mean, most auctions, they'll start at a particular level, right? Which in most cases is far above where it ought to take place, right? I've always said with brand bidding, right? I see so many people who bid on their own brand, right? And people go, again, whole different conversation about whether you should or you shouldn't. But equally, what you shouldn't do is you shouldn't have brand bidding where you're bidding $15 a click for your own brand, right? Because if somebody's typed in your brand name, they're looking for you. They're not looking for anyone else, right? If Google serves up anyone else as an alternative, they're doing the person that's doing the search, the end user, a real injustice, right? By I'm looking for your company and they're giving me somebody else as an alternative, right? That's not what I wanted. So for me, I've always maintained one of the lowest hanging fruits with any new client I work with is I go in and see what they're doing on their brand. If they're not bidding on their brand, great, I can set up a brand campaign and get some good success. If they are bidding on their brand on a PMAX and it's wacky bid prices, I'll put it onto a manual CPC, bring it right down to what should be a more sensible level, right? I look at impression share volume and see how much they have, right? And as long as that doesn't drop to a certain point, we can usually make a dramatic difference in terms of the overall sort of success that they have. And ultimately, what I'm trying to do there is I'm trying to free up budget that they're wasting on brand campaigns that could be going to generic or other stuff, test campaigns, that they're just wasting on bidding on their own brand. So that's, for me, what's always been the challenge about brand bidding versus not brand bidding. I think there's more kind of points in the middle that make it a relevant argument to put forward. What are your thoughts on brand bidding?
No, I love it. So I tend to be of the mind that anyone who makes the brand bidding conversation overly simplistic doesn't actually understand what's happening, right? Or just hasn't worked with enough brands, to be completely frank. Because when you've worked with brands from the smallest tiny little local up into some mega international billions of dollar corporation, you understand that bidding, like someone typing in brand, has vastly different intent behind it based on the brand, like the context. There's a whole lot that can go into it. So to just have this overly simplistic, here's what I do with brand terms is, to me, unhelpful. As an example, someone typing in a brand for, it's the easy one that everyone knows, but let's say Kleenex and tissue, right? Someone typing in the literal brand term Kleenex, that does not mean that they have high intent to purchase the actual brand of Kleenex. It probably just means they need some tissues. And that's actually an interesting way to look at your brand, as in some ways, it might actually be less down the funnel than you think. And it might even be in the prospecting category, right? And it's just really crucial to, I think, look at your account, your specific client, the specific industry, and to really start to try to identify, like, when people are searching for brand, what are the different possible intents? And then maybe start to organize your account and set your bidding targets and stuff like that around that. Because I just think it's way too overly simplistic to say, oh yeah, we do not want to bid on our brands. I hear that a lot from brand owners and operators. I don't want to waste money bidding on brand. And it's, hey, there might be some of that is the case. In fact, it's not uncommon for us to do some quick searches and auction insights and make sure, and if they really do own like their exact match of their exact domain or something like that with organic, and they don't really have competitors in auction insights, sure, let's exclude that. But like excluding any time your brand is listed with any other, if someone's searching for Zato PPC marketing, there's a lot of agencies that are bidding on PPC marketing, right? It'd be dumb for me. I don't know. We might have paused it to test, but we have typically defended our brand in ads just because there are other agencies bidding on that. So all that to say, yeah, I would agree. I think it's complex, and we have various standard process for how we identify that, what we do based in search and shopping and PMAX. And a lot of those for me increasingly is that I think there are very few standard best practices across every account, even if there are some places that we may implement to start. But overall, I think really customizing an account is the secret to being a good Google Ads manager, and also like surviving, let's say, the AI domination era sort of a deal, because I do think more of a custom approach and that is pretty crucial still.
Yeah, I mean, I always said with brand, it's things like, are they a new versus existing? If it's an existing person that knows who you are, right, then the likelihood is they're just being lazy. They go to Google, type in your brand, right? They click on the first link, which could be a paid ad, right? If you've created your audiences properly, right, then you should be creating a different user experience for those people that you know are existing customers of yours. So it could be that they're looking for the app to download, or they're looking to leave reviews, or they're looking to engage with you socially, or look at their existing kind of purchases that they've made to download something they may have forgotten, right? So their experience of why they've done it, why they typed in your brand, is different than somebody who's never heard of you before. But equally, somebody may have never heard of you before and they do all their work in the Google ecosystem, or it could be that they've seen a TV advert where you've been mentioned, right? And all of a sudden they're going to Google to type in your brand, right? Never having any exposure to you before, right? So because there's no click from the TV, right, it'll come through as a new visitor, right? But if you've done any sort of TV advertising, work with brands that are running TV campaigns, if you line up when did the 30-second slot appear on the TV versus when did you get a spike in brand search terms, right? There's usually a kind of correlation between those two, right? Can't quantify it. You can't say we spent this money on TV, we spent this money on paid search, we got this sales, we're going to give the money accordingly. But there's definitely an impact there. And I've always maintained, like, if it's a case of I can be there or I'm not there, and I'll let Google decide whether one of my competitors is what's shown, right? That's going to be damaging, right? I mean, if you've done really good work in building your brand, good social presence and everything else, and you don't bid on your own brand on Google, right, then again, you're leaving it open that potentially one of your competitors can come in and steal the click out from under your feet right at the very last minute, right? And you're going, why are our sales through the floor? Again, as much as I don't want to bid on brands, sometimes it's going to be a tactical and strategic thing to do that.
Yeah, for sure. Along those lines too, let's say the brand / custom managing account and having all that in your mind. Brand is one of those places where I'll still utilize manual CPC once in a while. I think I don't care if someone thinks that I'm an old grouch for this, but I just think anyone who really disses on manual CPCs is not actually fully understanding always like what that means. Because again, like a manual CPC, you're setting the max, right? You're setting the max that you're willing to pay. And so there's actually still some level where like you're still going to pay under that if the floor of the auction is lower and all that sort of thing. So even then, you're not saying this is what I'm going to pay all the time. And so what I've found is on very stable auctions, and brand is a great example of this. Sometimes a really core non-brand term, especially in an account that's been existing for a while, where you have an idea of where your impression share is and all that stuff. Sometimes that can work too. But to your point earlier of overpaying for CPCs, we see that all the time in brand campaigns. If we audit an account and someone is just like lazily slapped a T ROAS, and I will say lazily, I every once in a while, I'm not a huge one on all the time things, but every once in a while, like maybe T ROAS is brand, but you should test that. Because I just typically think that depending on the brand and depending on the match types and all that stuff, but if we're talking about you just really want to ensure you're owning some core brand terms, especially in exact and maybe some phrase match, and that you do in this particular client want to be relatively aggressive on those, so you really are controlling the brand landscape, you should test CPC, manual CPC. Because what you might see is that you still gain the exact amount of traffic and sales, but like on average, you just pay lower auction costs.
And
again,
I always do that. I always do manual
Yep.
CPC, but I include the columns that say impressions top and impressions absolute top, right? Because I want to make sure if this absolute top impressions is high, right? Let's say it's 85, 90% or whatever it might be, then you know that whatever you're bidding in terms of that manual CPC, you're capturing the top spot in paid ads virtually 9 out of 10 times, right? Which is probably as good as you're going to get, right? But if the impression top and impression absolute top is low, then you know that you're probably below where the floor is, right? You're probably harming the performance of that campaign because it's too low, right? Because again, sometimes you'll work with a brand and quite often it could be sort of, it's not quite as ubiquitous and well known, to your point about Kleenex and tissues, right? It's kind of like Hoover and vacuum. It's kind of so many different things where people will use one word but they mean something else, right? So it could be that there is some kind of anomalies in terms of the brand itself, and that's why the floor is maybe higher than you might think it ought to be. Again, I always think all these auctions should start at a penny, right? There should be 1 cent or 1p or whatever it might be, and work it up from there. And if there's nobody bidding on it, then if you're the only person bidding, you get the click for 1 cent, right?
That goes back to my point earlier of I do think that is a way to actually expand it back into reach for smaller and local businesses to do that. No, I mean, it's interesting. I love conversations like this because I think what they do sometimes, especially if someone's newer, is helps them think and understand a little bit better of what is happening behind the scenes and not just let's test this bidding model. Because to me, like, again, let's just take this brand conversation with manual CPC. Like, if you have a TROAS set, again, what you're communicating to Google is you're telling Google, hey, I'm okay with mush and averages, which again, in certain cases, especially prospect, that is really good. It's really important because what Google is doing is they're trying different things to see what they can get to over that 30-day period or whatever to hit your targets, and they might. And especially with prospecting, I think they do a pretty good job of figuring that out in ways that like you couldn't anymore with manual CPC. But with something like brand, where to your point, where it's very, very controlled, and again, that's the key. I don't want Google thinking, oh, you know what we should do this time? We should bid on this $17 click on this $20 product brand search, because over time we'll mush that into everything else. And again, that's the whole point, is because you're already aware of exactly what's happening in the auction and you're forcing those CPCs lower. There's no Google's actually kind of wrong on the mushability, which is why you might at the end of the month probably still see the exact same value you would have gotten at a much lower cost, a much higher efficiency.
And that's the thing. You could say, I've got a 400% ROAS, target ROAS, right? And then you could have all your brand stuff could be like 1,000%, and all your generic stuff could be 40%, but it blends out at the average of 400, right? And people go, look how great it is, right? And I've always said that there's so much at the top and the bottom that if you could kind of like think of those sort of independently, right, then you would be able to get the stuff at the bottom. You go, I don't really think that should be there, and I'm going to do something to try and mitigate for that. And the brand stuff, again, I think it should work harder for you and deliver more for you for less money, right? But it's amazing how, as you say, you call it mushing together, like I call it blended. It's kind of same sort of thing, right? Ultimately, yes, you want to have a blended overall performance, right? But you need to analyze it a little bit more granular detail, what that performance looks like, right? So you can see if there are any inefficiencies, where are those inefficiencies?
Yeah,
right. Because sometimes they're not always obvious, right?
I think at the end of the day, for a Google Ads practitioner, and I'm actually curious to hear your thoughts on this, but I think more and more I've started seeing, I think that really we are playing an efficiency game, like more than growth. And I want to be careful in what I communicate that because I do think like good efficiency leads to growth, but I actually still believe that most of a business scaling ability is outside of the demand capture channel. So it might be in YouTube or Meta, or like changing up your offer or things like that. That's where you actually really like finding a new TAM, whatever. And all demand capture is doing is simply like moving along with that. That's actually a little bit of what I talked about, is this like a vacuum cleaner illustration of our job is to vacuum up the room as efficiently as possible. But we can't grow that room. So all that to say, like, to this point, I think that's such a key part of what we're doing is we're saying, here's the available demand. we cannot grow that demand personally. Like I cannot through sheer willpower make more people search for my brand term. You can do that by running Google. You can do that by running demand creation channels, YouTube, whatever. But like I'm just saying, like me as the Google PPCer cannot force someone to type more brand terms in, which means at this time, without an external influence, there is a limit to the amount of value I can get from that brand term, if you will. So that's where, again, what we're saying is, therefore, what it does is it becomes an efficiency game. What is the most efficient that I can spend this cost to get the highest possible sales within that limitation? And then we're limited to that, but really at the end of the day, in my opinion, like Google Ads is an efficiency game. We're just constantly trying to be the most efficient we can with the budget, as then we also then work with the client and other channels to grow all of that demand. And I just think it's important to understand that that's what's happening behind the background, and that's our goal.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You can't create demand that doesn't exist, right? So if there's 1,000 searches for a search term, you're not going to go, I'm going to go and find the other 10,000 that exist elsewhere. There's 1,000, that's it, right? There's not that many, there's nobody else looking for it. As you say, you can do some TV and radio and all that sort of stuff to try and build your awareness. I mean, again, that's why sometimes I think when you're an agency that does Facebook and Google, you can understand the journey from Facebook on a brand awareness campaign, right? You may not get as many sales in Facebook, but you'll definitely get an uptick in search volume for your brand on Google as a result of somebody going, oh, that's an interesting product. Never heard of that before. Never heard of that brand. They fire up Google and maybe look at it on a different device, right? And that's like those kind of omni-channel visits are the ones I think a lot of agencies struggle to put together, right? It's understanding what that journey is. And I think part of it is because the channels have taken the data away from us, right? They haven't opened it up so that Facebook can know exactly what happened after the event. So literally the point in time that the baton's handed over to the next person, they don't know the outcome of that particular journey because of privacy. And I think in some respects, privacy for me has paid to a lot of success that advertisers could be having just by virtue of the fact that they're more worried about what people's experience is. And I think I've always maintained, I've got friends that say, whenever I see a cookie banner, I always reject cookies. And I'm like, you do realize you're still going to see ads. You're just not going to see ads that are personalized. You're just going to see ads that are going to be for whatever.
It's just, the right? Biggest budget. That's so one of the things I alluded to before, but that I've been speaking on lately. And I just really have been enjoying giving this particular talk, especially in Europe, because Europe really, to me, Europe is interesting in the PPC space. So I, as an outsider to Europe, looking at Europe, and I see a lot of incredible technical knowledge. There are just some astounding technical marketers in Europe who think deeply about things, and designing scripts, things like that are just like beyond me and challenge me all the time. And then also you have this privacy issue as well, privacy issue or positive, depending on the variety of things. And one of the things that I've been leaning more into, kind of along how we're talking, and what I've been presenting as well to them, is this level of, at some point, part of being a good Google Ads marketer is knowing when, okay, we might not have that data, and sure, let's keep fighting for it. Let's try to get it. But also, like, we don't right now have a lot of that data. We have other limitations. We have the efficiency limitation that I was talking about, as well as the inability to create demand other than on outside channels, like all this stuff. So we look at all that. And I think that means at some point, we as PPCers need to also be more and more willing to stop trying to solve a what I call a business problem with technical PPC solutions, if it's not something a technical PPC solution can solve. So for instance, going back to my efficiency thing, if you are looking at these 1,000 brand clicks that came through, and we've talked about it, you're maxing out everything, you've got like 98% of pressure share, all that stuff, right? And like, let's say your boss, your client comes to you and they're just like, hey, I really want more performance out of this brand term. At some point, then I think it is our responsibility, after we've A/B tested, we've done this stuff, right? But at some point to as part of that, help utilize our Google Ads knowledge to identify and help our clients actually move forward with business growth, which in my opinion would not in that exact instance be somehow changing the brand campaign. So in order to solve the business problem, the actual best thing that you as a technical PPC marketer might be is to not touch that brand campaign and to communicate and sit down with them and communicate on here's how this works. And so what we need is we need increased brand traffic. How do we get that primarily, right? So I think that's a big part of how increasingly our value will, yes, we still need to know we're doing that technical PPC stuff too. But at some point, being able to tie that to actual business problems and solutions, and then like help actually move the true growth markers of a business forward so that then our channel can continue to grow in its demand capture way. So that's a big part of what I've been presenting on.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I at some point in time, I'm sure. Again, I've watched you present many times. I would love to be in the audience again when you're doing that presentation, because again, I'm very much a kind of I tend, even though I specialize in PPC, I look at marketing in a much more holistic way. Because again, I've always maintained PPC is not a magic wand, right? You need to have a good user experience. You have a good landing page, right? There's so many things that have to go in your way, go the right way for you to succeed, right? As much as I think I'm good at doing PPC and I've been doing it a while, right? There's definitely things that I always learn from people like yourself and so on. And some of it's driven by test and learn. Again, I hate the whole kind of idea of having to spend money on something where it may or may not work, right? But that's part and parcel of doing what you do, right? You have a hypothesis and then you throw some money at it to test the hypothesis, and it can either be favorable or unfavorable. If it's unfavorable, you're like, I'm not going to do that again because that cost us money. But if it works well, then you can start rolling it out and scale it to other things and maybe other clients that you work with and that type of thing. And I think that's always the challenge sometimes, because Google knows Google. And yes, you'd have to give them the benefit of the doubt that they know it better than we know it. But what they don't know is they don't understand the other aspects of what that client is involved in. Have they got TV? Are they doing podcasts? Are they running SEO? Have they got some sort of, so again, some like native advertising going? Are they running programmatic? I mean, what does it all look like as a blended overall kind of thing? And how are they giving credit for what comes through? I mean, ultimately, attribution is always one of those things. It's the models that they have. I mean, they're all last click, first click, data driven, blah, blah, blah. And it's sort of like, again, I still maintain you're spending money and there's money that comes in from sales, right? Those are the two things that are absolute definites, right? And everything else in between is just a kind of blurry mess of how you actually distribute the credit according to what's actually come in. And to your point about in Europe, you have to worry about things like GDPR and people that don't give permission to be tracked and things like that, right? And all of a sudden, instead of having deterministic data where you know that a sale has taken place, you have to work on what they call probabilistic data, which is based on everything that we see that we can report on, we think a sale may have taken place, right? But it's not a definite sale, so there's no definite value, right? So people are trying to get all your numbers to marry up on GA4 and Google Ads, and they're never going to marry up. And that's just something we just have to accept, right? I've spent a lot of time with some enterprise clients I work with where all we're doing is we're going backwards and forwards on, well, this data's not right with what's showing in our CRM and blah, blah, blah. And it's, again, you just got to choose one and make that your single version of the truth, and everything like that you operate comes off that, rather than me trying to get the numbers to marry up when I know that they never will.
Yeah. And I mean, we probably are running out of time soon, but that's even then the next conversation is moving from attribution to incrementality and trying to better understand how do you track what my contributions are to this business that they would not have otherwise received. And that alone is tricky, even when you do have the maze, let's say, of a customer journey, where it's difficult to really identify. There's so much there, and I think that even incrementality is a little bit of a buzzword where it's run some holdout tests. It's okay. I mean, let's do that, but also that still might not be a full picture. This stuff's hard. It's why not every business sees overnight success.
But it's almost going around full circle, right? When we first started doing digital marketing, the reason it was so successful in the early days was budgets were being squeezed, right? Because of the economies of what was going on in the world at that particular point in time. And TV, radio, and print was not as trackable as people wanted it to be. They wanted to have some definitive, I spent $1,000, I made $5,000, therefore that is profitable.
Yeah.
Whereas with TV, you never know, right? You just can't say. I might have spent 50 grand on TV ads and never know whether any of that generated any revenue. But we're always moving away from that trackability in digital, right, to all of a sudden it's this the ethereal now. We spend money and we know that we've made some sales, but we don't really know who we should give credit to, right? And sometimes that's good, right? But equally, if you're a performance-based agency, I mean, I've been running a performance-based agency for forever, right? That is challenging, right? Because sometimes it's very difficult to quantify the performance, right? Because you've got one metric that you're measured by, right? And because of all that's going on in the kind of digital ecosystem, that's not always the kind of the right way of doing it. Same as pricing models for agencies. It's like when I first started, I used to charge a percentage of spend because that was just the way of the world, right? But if you think about it, if you're doing, let's say you do a brand campaign, you spend $1,000 and it generates $50,000 in sales, just for throwing out a number, right? If you're charging a percentage of spend, you get, let's say 15% of $1,000, that's $150, right? But you've generated $49,000 worth of incremental sales on the back of knowing that running a brand campaign is a good thing to do, right? And that's always the challenge. Whereas if it was 15% of the sales, then all of a sudden you spent $1,000, you made $5,000 in commissions, right? As an agency, and they're going to go, this isn't really good value. I'm paying you 5 times as much money as I've spent on traffic, right? And again, there's never going to be one model that you can say is definitively good or bad for advertisers, agencies, or Google, right? So it's kind of, I just think each one probably, I don't know about you, I always have, each client I have is on a model that works for the relationship we have, right? Sometimes I win, sometimes they win, and sometimes neither of us win, right?
I don't know if this is wrong or not, but I'm just increasingly convinced that the absolute success stories that you see are often tied way less to the marketing steps of data that we all think exist, which is what you just laid out. And sometimes it seems to be more that you can always identify that there's a person who was placed in charge, who had some sort of vision for what they thought they should do, regardless of whatever anyone told them. And they were either right or wrong. And I mean, you hear stories like that all the time with some of these really, really successful brands and businesses. And it's kind of like there is an art to attribution and incrementality too. There is a people say to me, like, how can you quantify the value of going to a conference or things like that? And there's just some level of, I can't really. And also there's some reason that I knew years ago that I should just spend a stupid amount of time on Twitter building a network, right? Yeah. And there was literally nothing in the data at that time in any way that told me I should do that. And I just think there's something to ponder there in terms of that. That's probably also why CEOs who do well are paid so much money, just because there's some like direct tie to, if they have the idea and they push something through, it's either right or not. So anyways, I'm not saying that we shouldn't do data, and I still think there's so much directional benefit to things as well. But I just think sometimes, and that's what's tricky about business, and that's what we can't get away from. Sometimes there's just something almost more artistic than science in someone who just says, no, this is what we're gonna invest in AWS, even though we're losing so much flipping money, because someday it's gonna come through for us. And he was right, and it did.
Absolutely. But it's a bit like running a podcast. I mean, this is probably episode 50 something of digital marketing stories, and I mean, when you run a podcast, it takes a lot of time to put it all together, right? It takes money on hosting and tracking platforms and all that sort of stuff. I mean, I know I've picked up clients on the back of the podcast, but that's not part of the reason why I do it. I do it because it's fun. I love hanging out and talking to people like yourself, because we don't, again, as much as it's great fun to go and talk at conferences, you never really get enough time to go and sit down and talk to the people that you want to talk to for any length of time. There's always people who've got stuff to go and do and everything else. So for me, having the opportunity to invite people I know and people I don't know onto the show to share their kind of their knowledge and their wisdom and expertise, so that other people that watch the episodes or listen to the episodes can take what we say and apply it to their own situation. And I know I picked up a couple of clients on the back of running podcast episodes where I've had guests on and they liked the guests, so they wanted to work with me. And I'm like, why don't you want to work with the guests? I mean, that's probably more beneficial. But, at the end of the day, they liked some of what I said as well as what the guests have said, right? But for me, it is about that whole, I want to hold the platforms I work with to account, right? So Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and so on. I want to make them accountable for delivery of like our side of the equation, right? And equally, I want my clients to do well, and I want their end users, their customers, to have a good experience working with them, right? So that's always, for me, I want it to be everyone gets the opportunity to win, right? I don't want it to be the shareholders of the platforms are the only people that win here. I want us all to have success as a result, which is part of the reason why I'm still in the industry, still love it, right? At some point in time, I may not love it, but right now I'm still in love with the industry and want to continue to do it. Kirk, it's been so much fun to have you on the show today. I mean, we've been talking for probably an hour. We could probably talk for another 3 hours without even breaking sweat, right? I don't want to turn myself into Joe Rogan, right? I know he has people on, and I always say, like, how do they actually go to the toilet or something like that, right? But maybe perhaps they're all fitted with catheters before they
dehydrate
sort of sit down,
themselves before it or something. They'd like train for the Joe Rogan podcast.
But again, I feel like even though we've been talking for an hour, we've probably covered the tip of the iceberg when it comes to knowledge about paid search and shopping, which is obviously your expertise. Again, I'd love to have the opportunity at some point in time in the future to have you back so we can talk a little bit more about some of the nuts and bolts of specifically like running shopping campaigns. So if you're up for that, let me know.
Yeah,
cool.
Absolutely.
Good. So thanks a lot for being such a great guest. I'm going to wrap things up, and all of Kirk's details will be in the show notes after the episode goes live. Only remains for me to say thank you for listening, watching, and we'll see you on the next episode of Digital Marketing Stories. And